Hello, humans. Welcome to Intentionally Intersectional. This is a workshop designed for firms that have mature enterprise resource group programs, or at least have multiple ERGs in their firm. So today, we're going to discuss how Pride ERGs can engage other ERGs within their firm to leverage their commonalities to attract membership, drive engagement, and perhaps make a difference in the lives and communities of our members. I have a script. We'll talk about why I have a script later. So, if it's our difference or our individuality that makes us strong together, then it's our similarities that make us stronger together. So we are stronger together. So you can see up on the screen, we're going to be doing Mentimeter, so get your personal devices out. In a moment, the panel will introduce ourselves, and we'll tell you some compelling use cases or case studies, personal stories about how you can make compelling cross-sectional ERG programs. But first, let's get this going. Let's start off with introductions. And after the introductions, Kaylee is going to bring us through a review of intersectionality. So my name is Michael Roman. My pronouns are he, him. I am wearing a colorful shirt. I'm a middle-aged white man with brown hair and glasses. My day job, I'm a risk officer for the wealth and investment management line of business for Wells Fargo. And I've been with Wells Fargo for 38 years. My gay job, I am the enterprise strategy leader for our Pride ERG. We have nearly 16,000 members. But I'm also a member of all 10 of our ERGs, which gives me access to approximately 60,000 unique members across the program. The next panelist has an intersection with their day and gay job. So, Jerome?
Thank you, Michael. So I'm Jerome Flores. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a gay Asian male. I'm wearing glasses. I have black hair. I'm currently wearing a red polo and jeans. I am a senior diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant with our ERG program at Wells Fargo. And I'm what they call an ERG liaison. So I support 3 of our ERGs, which is Pride Connection, Asian Connection, and Hispanic and Latino Connection. And I help with their priorities, their commitments, and what they want to accomplish at the enterprise level. I'll pass it over to Adriana.
Thank you, Jerome. Adriana Fomanaya. I don't think you were expecting to come all the way to Florida without meeting a Latina lesbian, so here I am. I'm a business growth consultant for Wells Fargo. I've been with the organization just under 18 years. I manage all of our small business community engagement. So I manage our Chamber of Commerce relationships for the Southeast region, which includes North Carolina South, with the focus on making sure that we're supporting our small business owners to be successful, tools and resources, and a heightened focus on our diverse small business owners that we serve in our community. Pride. I started with the Pride organization about 13 years ago as a chapter chair in North Florida. Then I became the Enterprise Events Chair. I held that role for about 4 years. And then Pride just won't let go. So here I am today, excited to be here with each of you and share a little bit about my story.
Thanks, Adriana. Hey, everyone. My name is Kaylee Peterson. My pronouns are they, them. I am a white, transgender, non-binary human with non-apparent disabilities. I also have notes. If I'm shaking, it's because it's cold out here, not because I'm nervous. For visual description, I am wearing a blue suit coat that matches my eyes. It makes them pop, so if you get the privilege of being close enough, take a look. I've been with Discover for 12 years. I actually have a pretty incredible career journey. I started on the phone taking inbound calls for our credit card potential credit card holders, and had a pretty incredible career for the last 12 years, navigating everything from customer care centers to headquarters risk, lean management consulting, and I have my dream job now. So I get to serve our employees on the diversity, equity, and inclusion team The last 2 years, I have owned our ERG ecosystem and helped develop not just the system, but also the leaders. And I have now moved into a disability inclusion strategy role.
So it's great. Thank you for all of the responses to the survey. You can see where there are many other types of ERGs that are out there, but the numbers keep coming in, and we're pretty fairly evenly split. But Kaylee, why don't you take us into our intersectionality refresher?
Absolutely. Do y'all feel okay if I stand up for a minute? Okay. Gotta get in my training mode. Put on the costume, if you will. All right, so we want to unpack this term intersectionality. So I mentioned I'm new-ish in the DE&I space. And when I entered that space as a baby DE&I professional, this word came up, intersectionality. I was like, cool, I can use that in a sentence. And so I started throwing it around. And my interpretation of that was that we all have multiple identities, multiple hats that we wear, and we're not just one thing. Cool, I can move on, I can put that in my training, my consulting, whatever that might look like. I was wrong. Intersectionality is a lot deeper than that. And so luckily I had someone give me some feedback and said, hey, maybe you should research this a little bit. So I did, and started understanding more about what it really means. So as humans, we're consuming millions of pieces of information at any one time. And so we have this need, this desire, to figure out ways and frameworks in order to understand the world around us, right? So luckily, we have amazing people in this world that helps us to do that. And in the 1980s, Kimberly Crenshaw, as a scholar, created this term, intersectionality. And what Kimberly understood was that there wasn't a way for us to understand how Black women's lived experiences were different from the experiences of white women, Black men. And so to unpack that a little bit more, this is a way that helped me to kind of understand not just what intersectionality is, but the way to use the concept. So if you look at the screen, what is intersectionality? We all have multiple identities, multiple attributes about ourselves, right? And in society, in our cultures, those get assigned or attributed either favorability or unfavorability, right? So kind of take note for a minute, what things about yourself are on the screen? Where do they kind of land in that spectrum, right? What's really important for us to know, though, is that it is dependent on the culture. So example of, in the United States, generally speaking, we favor young over old, right? So much so that we spend a whole lot of money hanging on to that youth. Whereas in many Asian cultures, the favorability swings more towards the old, the elderly, the wisdom holders, right? So it's important to kind of understand that. So now that you've kind of taken that, now there's intersections in where those identities play. And what happens here is those identities that are favored also bring advantages to that favoritism. Privilege, if you will. Yes, I use the P word. And those that are unfavored have disadvantages, obstacles, and challenges. And what was really helpful for me as I was studying this and trying to kind of grapple with what this meant for me is it helped me to understand what allyship and what advocacy is really about. And in these spaces where I found myself occupying privilege, my skin lacks a lot of melanin, I'm white. That gives me privilege. I'm educated. I come from a middle class home. My parents are still married. So I have a lot of privilege in that space. I also have some disadvantage. I am queer, I'm trans, non-binary, I deal with multiple mental health conditions. And so in those spaces, I need to ask for allyship and advocacy. But many times those pieces kind of intersect. What do I do with my white privilege but my disadvantaged transness? And so it's helped me to understand what spaces I occupy and who's around me, to look at how I call in and ask for when I need support, when I need an ally, but also where I need to position myself physically, even at times, to protect and uplift those who occupy different spaces. And that's a lot of the work that at Discover our ERGs have taken on over the last couple of years and are pushing even further forward into understanding how do we start to learn about those other ERGs? How do we become more intentional and more impactful with our programming, with the way we show up with each other, with where we call in and say, hey, we need you. Something's happening for us right now, and we can't have you just on the sidelines in your silos. We have to have you on the front lines with us as allies, as advocates, and start understanding that it's not just this label that we attach to these identity groups, but there are these lived experiences that we can connect with. And so that's a lot of what this programming today, what you'll hear, and I want you to just continue thinking about where do you land in these spaces, in these spectrums? How are you as ERG and business and DE&I leaders thinking about being more intentional and going into those spaces? I oftentimes say, like, let's stop freaking, like, speaking to the choir. We don't need it anymore. How do we go out and get in and ask for permission or demand those spaces so that it's not the choir, it's the people actually need to hear it in order to make the change?
Thank you, Kayla. Very powerful. Now you'll notice that we each are back up here showing you our different diverse dimensions: sexual orientation, gender identity, racial, religious, generational. And I'll just discuss some of mine later on when I tell you my story. But I wanted to get you in the mind frame of how you would think about this. Now, I'm going to give you an example. It's only my lived experience, so it may not be true for everybody, but I'm a Jewish Arab, and I am a member of our Middle East connection. And whenever I go to the ERG chapter meetings and I bring up something about Israel or Judaism, I am talked over, I'm ignored, and sometimes I, receive, it's almost aggressively responded to. Now, I usually come from a place of privilege. I'm a white man. I go into my day job, into my meetings, I speak, people listen, at least people are willing to have conversation with me. And then this is the first time that I started to think about what it might be like for people who are marginalized, who feel racism and hate and bigotry. Now, I can't compare to other marginalized groups, but it's just something that clicked for me. And as we get into these case studies, we'll give you some solutions on how you could use those kinds of feelings and as ERG leaders, perhaps reach across the aisle. So is there anybody else on the panel that had kind of a moment like that they wanted to talk about? Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about ERGs then. We all basically have the same needs, desires, objectives, outcomes. We're looking to provide advocacy, volunteerism, mentorship, and a voice for the affinity groups. But all of these that we're looking at on the screen are more for our individual constituents. And I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on any of these, but I'm going to just go to the next slide. And what we're talking about today is enhancing your diversity initiatives. So take advantage of the intersectionality that's out there, because while we want to impact our members for certain, we also want to impact our companies, our enterprises. And So as an example, we want to create truly diverse and inclusive workplaces. What do I mean by that? Well, some companies are actually using their ERGs as diverse candidate pools for their internal postings. I mean, there are so many connection points that you can make, not only within the ERG. So that's an example.
Another examples, empowered and uplifting others, and really specifically thinking about opportunities for growth and achievement through leveraging some of the cross ERG mentorship programs, having an opportunity to connect with somebody that maybe doesn't necessarily look like you, has the same experience as you, for you to learn and grow, and really focus on how you grow as an individual, not just in your professional journey, but also in your DE&I journey, because those two are so important and critical for you being successful, and making sure that we're looking beyond, maybe the ERGs that you most feel comfortable with. I think Michael mentioned how many he's a part of, and it's so important that as you think about your engagement and how to really cross the ERG's efforts, it's not about signing up so that you can say you're part or to read a newsletter maybe every 3 months. It's really about being active, being engaged, and finding ways to learn, finding ways to support, and really, empower those and others.
I think when it comes to systemic discrimination, ERGs can be a really great sounding board for the power of self-ID. The power of data to make change. At Discover, we use our self-ID to help us understand where there is data-driven systemic discrimination, where and if there are certain communities and groups that aren't getting the same treatment and privilege that other groups are. And so, Michael, I know you and I worked very hard on changing and utilizing self-ID and figuring out ways to make that feel safer, especially for those of us in this community, so that we can understand and know who our people are, so that we can know and understand what's happening, again, those lived experiences and what those look and feel like, and then put the data behind it in order to make different business decisions.
And then, as we think about ERGs, or we call them ERNs, Employee Resource Networks, it's a space and a way to create more equitable and supportive places. Sometimes we focus on the diversity, the inclusion, the belonging, but we also need to create that more equitable space where everybody is equal. We all have our lived experiences, and we'll talk through some of the intersectionality and some of the things that we go through, but we all go through the same things. And so it's important that we understand some of those experiences that we go through, and we can be supportive of our experiences and the work that we do here. And with that, we'll go through some case studies and some of our own experiences, and I'll pass it over to Michael, who will start us off.
Back to me in the studio. So the first thing we're going to talk about, first case study, I call them, is about coming out, passing, and covering. And we largely think about coming out as an LGBTQ phenomenon. And similarly, passing, people who want to cover or hide parts of themselves in the workplace. Well, let me tell you a little bit of a story. There's a number of people from my company that probably will learn a little bit about me as well. We're always coming out, right? So I grew up in New York City. I was in a very diverse neighborhood. I was fortunate enough to be born to parents who owned and managed gay bars pre-Stonewall, before I was born. Coming out was not an issue for me. I came out when I was 16, so that's the late 70s. It was also very easy for me to come out in the workplace early on. So I had like a safe space office that people could come and talk about things before we even had ERGs. And later on in my diversity journey, actually about 2 years ago, I had to come out as neurodivergent. And it was such a very difficult process. I knew my authenticity was lacking. I wasn't connecting with my coworkers, and it was starting to show up in the workplace as well, where I needed to come clean with my management. When I was 4 years old, I had a traumatic brain injury. And all sorts of things have stemmed from that. But I suffer from ADHD, OCD, very high anxiety. You could probably tell at the beginning of this workshop the anxiety that came over me.
You should have seen him earlier, running around.
I thought he was
Yeah,
just
everybody
cold.
knows the deal at my firm. But what really came up for me was the coming out process. I was concerned about how this would impact my work. What would people think of me? Would I still get the jobs, the projects? Would I still be promotable? Now that they knew, now that this was out, was this an impediment? I felt, whether or not it was true, that people were treating me differently the more that they knew about this. And people probably didn't realize that I was sitting in meetings having migraines, and they would think I was just tuning out or being disinterested. Or how I sometimes will be in a conversation with somebody and, oh, shiny object, and all of a sudden I'm talking about something else. And getting back to the issue of coming out, it is not an LGBTQ phenomenon. Everybody comes out about something. And so I reached across the aisle to our Disability Connection leaders, and I asked them if they ever thought about talking about coming out in the disability space. And I heard from them. Luckily, I didn't know about this, but June 15th is Neurodivergent Pride Day. And so a panel discussion was born. And what we quickly noticed just in that conversation is that there were so many other dimensions. And let me just get this going. What do you hide at work? So many other things that we hide at work that people have to come out about or that they pass. And our goal was to help people, what we can teach other people about coming out. We wrote the book on coming out. And also about passing and covering, and other groups who have overcome that, and why it's important that you take the leap of faith. And I drank the Kool-Aid. I want to bring my authentic self to work. How can I do that? So use your other ERGs to learn about their stories. And I think it's very powerful. And because of that, I have much deeper connections at work, and I'm much more productive. So let me see. Obviously, anxiety is the big one. You all know I already mentioned that earlier. And depression is actually something that is important to come out about at work as well. Your coworkers and your management need to understand how you operate. So let me see what the script says, because part of my traumatic brain injury sometimes has me not remembering things. Well, you know what? I'm going to move on to the next case study. So before I do that, though, all of these polls will be published. I'm going to do a final PDF and put it back out to the platform site so you can see all of these answers, and you can take a look at this PowerPoint with all of those in there. But from one excellent word cloud to another, we are going to move on from coming out and passing to hate, bigotry, and discrimination.
Awesome. So if you haven't noticed, I am Asian as well, Filipino. I think you saw that on an earlier slide there. And as we think about the LGBTQ+ community, it's made up of a lot of different groups. We have a lot of unique experiences, a lot of lived experience as well. So I'm a gay Asian man, and it's interesting. I've always identified as gay first and Asian second. But I never really thought about that side of me, the Asian side there, just more about being the gay. But in the last few years, especially with the pandemic, the Asian hate that's arisen, I've grown to really realize that I am Asian, and how it's affected me, and how that intersectionality has really created much more of an experience for me. And the one thing, there's a lot of discrimination and hate, and sometimes when you're an Asian person or person of color in the LGBTQ+ community, it can be very difficult sometimes. And I talk about the one example where I've been out to maybe by myself, or maybe went to a party somewhere, and just a lot of times I'm the only person of color or one of two persons of color, especially, you know, I'm an Asian person, and nobody talks to me. Like, there's no connection there. There's nothing. Maybe the other person of color has come up and talked to me. So, and I've reached out to or talked to other people, but you know, I don't really get any reciprocal there. And it's just odd that like, you know, what is it about me? And so, you know, I grew up in an area that was predominantly Filipino. I grew up in southeastern Virginia Beach. There, lots of Filipinos, lots of Asians, and so again, it didn't affect me. And you know, I didn't feel discriminated against. I had lots of other Asian friends, but you know, as I've grown into this adult, I've felt more discriminated against. And then, you know, I'm sure you've seen a particular app, and I don't think people say it now, or actually somebody did say it, but you see that in, you know, no fats, no femmes, and no Asians. Very specific there. So, and I've felt that. I felt that a lot, especially in my older life. So, you know. Think about, you know, what, as a person of color, you know, that what we go through and what we're thinking about is, you know, oh God, I'm like getting a little nervous here. You know, what lived experiences, you know, we're not a monolith here. You know, there are certain stereotypes. You've got certain people who are into the stereotypes and certain people who aren't and who you know, want to move beyond that. But what can we do? So as we think about solutions, you know, really understand and reach out and seek out new perspectives, you know, encourage discussion, be open to dialogue, and just talk to somebody and learn and understand some of the cultural differences there. I was actually in a pre-conference session where we talked about intersectionality, and you know, intersectionality is not just about the differences that we have there, but it's really understanding the value of that intersection, and you know, what do I bring as an Asian person? What do I bring to, you know, other people's perspective as a gay man? So really think past just the, you know, I'm gay and Asian and cisgender and a man, but really what is it about that intersection that has, you know, helped me or you or what have you. So with that, I will pass it over to Adriana.
And I actually am going to pass it over.
Oh.
Do you mind if I call a little bit of an audible, Michael? Could we go back to the word cloud?
Sure.
So as I kind of sat up here, the one before from the group,
The next
if we're able.
I'm sorry?
The one before.
Oh, the one
from the
before.
group, yeah.
Sorry about that.
I think this is pretty representative of my experience. So just take a moment, kind of look at the words on that. And the bigger words are the ones that more of us have talked about, have answered. So the bigger the word, the more of us have responded that way. If you take any one of these, and the question was, what do you hide at work? Every single one of these, and I'm going to guess some of you answered multiple, like you're probably hiding more than one thing, takes energy away from focusing on your work, right? Every part of you that you are hiding is taking energy away from you showing up as your best self. A few of those words are my words. As I saw them come up on the stage or up on the screen, you know, divorce. There's a stigma with that. It's something I don't like to talk about at work because it feels like a failure. And will somebody then see me as a failure and not trust me with the work that I'm supposed to do? You know, being trans, can you not make up your mind? You're gonna switch again? Now you're non-binary? Like, what do those things mean that brings in this sense of fear and like, what is that trust? I don't know what that is. I don't understand what that means. Mental health, it's a huge one. I hit it probably up until a year ago when I started saying out loud. I have a tattoo on my arm that says stay with a colon. Anybody here familiar with the Colon Project? Anybody else also have a colon tattoo? I'm a survivor of suicide attempt. That's really hard to call out at work. Are you delicate? Will this work be too much for you? I don't want to put you in that space. You have anxiety. What will that mean? Can you be trusted as a leader? All of those things and experiences that this whole room has together keeps us from being able to progress in our careers probably at a higher rate than others. And you add those intersectional identities as people of color, religious factors come into play, single parents. Name any one of those unfavorable identities, right, that are seen, adds to it an additional layer of challenges to us. So for me, it's really been about learning how to use those as superpowers. Through a lot of trial and error, albeit. There's been times that I think I've overused the superpowers, and times that I've probably underused it and didn't have the courage that I really needed in order to make that progression. You know, one of the things that oftentimes, like, I'll go into the room, anybody like do like the social things, and now we're back in office, and so, you know, now you have in-person events, and in these social settings, I get a lot of anxiety. I also have anxiety. And walk into the room, and what typically happens is like the men are in one area and the women are in the other. You seen it? And I walk into the room and I'm like, so where do I go? You know, I'll go over with the women, but that doesn't feel quite right. The conversations that are happening in those spaces. Go over to the men, that doesn't feel quite right. And so that impacts my ability to connect. And y'all know that in order to climb the ladder, you gotta have connections, you have to network, you've gotta have people on your side to champion you, to take that chance on you. And if I can't find those connections with those people, my name's not being said. And so through all that, and through some really incredible people that I've worked with and for, and through the incredible Pride team, they're all in the front row right now as I'm looking at them, calling me forth to be the best version of myself, to own those parts of myself that are not weaknesses, are not liabilities, but are strengths. And finding my superpower in the fact that I have dealt with mental health issues, that I am trans and know how to navigate spaces in a very different way. I can walk into a room and know the temperature of the room. I can look at someone and, generally speaking, know whether or not I can trust them. I have an emotional intelligence that I've been told. I think I agree. That I've been told is greater than a lot of people, and that makes me a uniquely strong leader, to be able to put together teams and see people's capabilities and opportunities and be able to connect with people on a deeper level than a lot of other people. So I would say figure out that superpower. Don't see those things that make you different as challenges and weaknesses, but figure out how to reframe those things into superpowers. I know, Michael, working with you, your OCD, or your attention to detail, is incredible. The things that you've been able to create on our behalf for this panel, for self-ID work, not something I could do. But your ability to pay attention to those details make you uniquely positioned in so many different roles. And I have absolutely loved working with you.
Thank you. I also thank all of you for sharing your superpowers and that you've gotten from your lived experiences. And I don't know if there's anything that you want to cover on. I mean, I think we were going to talk about career advancement and socialization and the things that we could do. And we've got some time, and even back with discrimination, and it's really reaching across the aisle. I would love to, I always love to partner with the Black African American Connection because I'd love to take a page out of their playbook when we're learning to deal with homophobia, because it's such a strong message, and the resilience, and we can learn from all of the ERGs. So how about on career advancement and socialization, anything there that you didn't touch on that you want to?
Yeah, I think just like the power of proximity. Brian Stevenson, I think, is the one who often talks about this. It was actually our Black employee resource group that brought Brian in to talk about this. And it really resonated with me. And like, it's so hard to fear something that you know. And so much of the fear comes from the unknown. So that power of proximity. And some of the ways you can do it, leveraging your ERGs, are again self-ID. Like the more data we have, the more we actually understand and know the communities and the people and the experiences in our companies. You know, making sure we have these ERG events, intersectional. Two of the ones that I know our Pride team at Discover has hosted that have been incredibly impactful is we worked with a company called Storybolt. They do documentary storytelling, and they brought in a documentary about the trans experience in military service. And having those two communities together and talking about like what military service is like and coming back into civilian life, which is what a lot of our employees are, they're veterans, but also understanding this other community that oftentimes, you know, the don't ask, don't tell still kind of permeates part of that community. Like we know you exist, but we don't really want to like touch on it. Launch an incredible conversation. We also had, I'm looking at three of you here, a conversation with our members, our LGBTQIA members who are also Black, having a conversation about why we're not seeing more queer people of color in leadership. And the challenges of that and how that experience in the workplace shows up. That gave me more information and understanding, and thank you, Chris, Jamichael, and Ryan for helping me understand how I needed to, again, stand in front of and advocate for in behalf of experiences that are not my own, but where I can use my voice and my platform to make it safer for all of you.
And conversely, we all do professional development events and personal development events, and I don't want to hear a story of how someone broke through the glass ceiling or the velvet ceiling. I want to know how people made it, and I want to hear that from all different segments and from all different levels of the organization. All stories matter. And we wound up in the same month, 3 different ERGs doing very similar programming with people in their own segment. And I would love to just switch those up because the story is much more powerful when you don't identify with it as much. So I'm going to move along. I see we've got a lot of superpowers out there, so we are powerful. We are powerful. And we're going to move on to health, safety, and family.
Alrighty, well that's me. I figured I'll call an audible, as I'm liking what you're doing. But it won't be the same type of audible. So when you think about why am I here today, I'll lead with a solution. I'll give you an example, because I saw a question earlier that came up on the screen that referenced some ERGs pushing back, right, on the collaborative efforts. So in this example, I'm in my inbox in my day job, and I see a request that said Asian American Connection. And Adriana Famanaya, if you don't see my picture, the A and the YA sometimes confuses people, and I was like, well, I think they got the wrong person. So I start kind of digging into the email, and I realize, oh, it's the Enterprise Asian American Islander ERG is actually doing a Pride event. And somehow they got my name and they invited me to speak on a panel discussion that was a lead and learn. So they actually picked a LGBTQ book and had leaders across different ERGs read it, It was, probably many of you might have read it, Marriage of a Thousand Lies, right? So I'm reading this book and I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna relate to this, but I guess there's like a lesbian twist or something. So I'm reading it and my wife is like, what are you reading? And I'm like, shh, like I gotta finish this before this panel event. So needless to say, I'm reading this book about this woman that lives in the Northeast and she's navigating how to come out to her family. She has so many concerns about losing her family, not feeling like she can relate to her community and her culture anymore. And honestly, it felt so much like my story. And I come from Miami, Florida, from a completely different island. And I spoke on that panel. Somehow Michael Roman was in the audience, and within I think a day or 24 hours, he's like, I need you to come to Out and Equal. And you don't say no to this guy. Like, you just don't say no. And I was like, well, what am I gonna do? And he's like, you're gonna speak about a case study. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, just tell him your story. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So again, another fantastic solution is looking for opportunities to really collaborate, to intersect the work, and always say yes. The first out lesbian leader that I remember interacting with, there wasn't an email that she would send that I didn't just dive all over. Like, I'd save them. Like, I had her own file just for her. I think I even bought a suit that looked like hers. Like, it was, and like, she didn't have the best taste. So I was just gonna say that. Wherever she is, I apologize if she's here. So, she one of her taglines was always say yes. So I have always leaned into saying yes. So, and the reason why I said yes to that event was because I hadn't told my story in a while. And I think that every time we have an opportunity to tell our story, it allows us to reflect, it allows us to learn about ourselves and unpackage, and that's how we continue to grow, and it's really how we share with others. So when you think about health, safety, and family, I think it was about 15 years ago, I think I got my first what I would call professional job. I had an office, I had business cards at the bank. It was one of our legacy banks before we became Wells Fargo. And I had built a really good network of really close, tight people that became friends to family type of situation at this bank branch in the middle of nowhere, Florida, because I was going to school there. It was, hopefully there's some Gators in the room, but if there's not, that's okay. So I came out at work and it just kind of naturally happened. It's like, why is your roommate always here? And it's like, well, there's a situation. There's a situation going on that we might not just be roommates, especially because there's only a one bedroom. So and I was embraced. I was embraced by my out gay branch manager that wanted to, he showed up the next day with rainbow balloons at the office and I was like, oh my goodness. And everybody else was super supportive. And that's when this work started for me. I'm like, the fact that these strangers that I met 2 years ago are now supporting me and empowering me, and I am showing up better and stronger every day at work because of that. I'm better for my clients. I'm better for the employees that I work with. I'm better for the organization because of that support that I got. It's a beautiful experience. It's like one for the textbooks, right? So I grew up like I said, in Miami, Florida. I am first generation American. My parents came here from Cuba in the 60s. If you don't know that story, you can Google it or meet me at the stage later. I can fill you in. And I was raised conservatively with 3 brothers. My parents really leaned into their religion, but more importantly, in addition to the religion, was leaning into family. My grandparents lived with us, and that was it. Everything started and ended with family. We woke up and prayed together. In the middle of the day, you had to remember because, my grandmother was always praying, pray, before you eat and then pray at night. And we'd go to church 3 times a week. And we were really devoted to religion and to ourselves and really trying to embrace the American culture as a family, but never leaving behind our heritage. Although we came with nothing. There was nothing that represented our heritage except for ourselves, which is why the family unit became so important. So I'm living my life. I'm now open, I'm a lesbian, I got this beautiful partner, I'm doing great at work, and the time's coming. I have to tell them at some point, and I just remember always thinking to myself, they're just gonna disown me. I'm losing this super important part of my life. Number 1, my family, number 2, my culture, who I am, what I've always been until now that I'm also a lesbian and gay. And The years passed. I navigated it. I was like a pro. If there was like ever a conversation that became like a little bit close to like talking about the next boyfriend I was gonna have, and it had been years, I would just like find a way to like talk about work. Like that was my go-to thing. And we were moving to North Florida, to a more metro area with the organization. And like I had to at least tell my parents I was going to leave and move with this other person. So I'm explaining the move and the transfer. And I remember my mom looking at me and kind of at that moment, like the dots connected. And she's like, so you're moving and she's moving and you guys are gonna go move into a house, into a condo that you're buying. And I was like, this is when it happens. Like the pacata, la chancleta, like all the things, like this is when it's gonna happen. And I'm like ready for it. I'm in the garage and I'm like ready for it. And she looked at me and she turned around and she walked away. And at this point, I think I score. Like, I'm like, yes, that was awesome. Just ignore. That's like what we're good at as Cubans. We just don't talk about stuff until we're ready to talk about them. And some things we won't ever talk about. So I think I won. I go back home, and I'm like, yep, I came out. I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure, but I think I did. And I go back to work the next day. I'm suited up, client after client. And the branch manager comes in, he's like, have you checked your voicemails? And I was like, no. He's like, the phone hasn't stopped ringing since 10 a.m. And I was like, what? And he's like, your mother won't stop calling the bank. She needs to get a hold of you. And I told him, I said, oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure I came out yesterday and I think the shoe's dropping. And he's like, well, what do you need? Do you need to leave work? And I was like, no, like I'm here and like I'm a professional and I don't, no stress. Like it'll be okay. I'll take care of it when I get off of work. And I had a flip phone at the time. I like opened my phone, I see all those missed calls and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I'm like going to do another transaction at the bank branch and all of a sudden I look and my mom has driven 4 hours and is now standing in the bank lobby. And I'm like, of course, that's what a Cuban mom does. You get in the car and you drive. You don't want to answer my call? Guess what? I'm driving. I'm driving. You should have talked to her when I moved to Los Angeles and she had to get on plane rides, which she never did because times got better as that happened. So I told her, I said, like, I'm like, Mom, I appreciate you coming. I obviously see that you're concerned. Can you please go to my apartment and I'll meet you when I'm done with work? Like I'm a professional, I'm 24, whatever. So she does. So she's there with my father. I get home from work. I said, let's go into the bedroom. So we go into the bedroom and she's just hysterical crying. And like, I'm feeling her pain. Like I feel this pain because her whole life she's envisioned having this beautiful Cuban daughter that marries the beautiful Cuban man and we have beautiful Cuban children and the legacy continues. So in that moment, I didn't understand that. I understand it now. In that moment, there was fear, there was concern, and she looked at me and she said, like, this can't happen, not a Fomanaya, it's not gonna happen, and the love that your father and I and your brothers and God has for you is gonna fix this. So what we need you to do is just pack up whatever you have, and we're gonna go. We're gonna leave. And I just like, it was like, wait, what is happening here? Like, I just remember playing, as I tell the story, you play it back in your head and you think about things. Like, and I just looked at her and I said, I can't. Like, this is who I've always been. I'm sorry that I never told you until now, but I'm not going. And I hope that your love continues. I hope the love that God has for me continues, but I can't go. So when you think about practicing healthy family boundaries, I thought I was gonna be disowned. And I'm not saying I disowned my family, but there was a time for years that there was separation, that there wasn't me feeling comfortable with allowing them in, because I lost their trust, they had lost my trust, and we had to rebuild. And it took many years of just being resilient, leaning into the ERG. I mean, there was not a Pride event that I wasn't in, that I wasn't involved. I was leading Pride events. If there was a parade, I was there. And telling my story, and what was like the best gift that the ERGs gave me was not being able to make great friends and learning. It was the times that I had people come to me and say, my child just came out, my sister is coming out, I know your story, what do I need to do different to not have that happen to them? Like that is the prize. So the hours of extra work, the hours of extra energy to put into the ERG was so worth it because I got to give somebody a gift that I always wanted, right deep down inside. And it took navigating those multiple dimensions, understanding that even though I wasn't tightly connected with my Hispanic background, that it was always there. And for a time, it was quiet. And I felt like I couldn't relate, because if they didn't understand me, how could I understand them? And I continued to kind of push through and do the best that I can to serve others. And as it kind of all turns out and it becomes full circle, I was living in Los Angeles, and I had nothing to do in my 500 square foot apartment through the stay-at-home time. And that's when I started doing a lot of the work about figuring out my relationships with my family and really understanding how I can lean back into the Cuban culture that I really missed. And I realized there was resentment, that I had been holding a lot of resentment, and that I really wasn't understanding where they were coming from. And that took time for me to navigate. It took work for me to do and really unpack things for me to get to a place where I started talking more about myself. And they were ready to listen. They wanted to know. Like, my mom doesn't, she calls me every day. At some point, no, she'll call in like an hour. So my mother will call and she'll say, like, how's Luann doing? And that's my wife's name. And it's like 15 years ago when she was telling me, get in the car, we're gonna go take you to church. Like, I didn't think the how's your wife doing conversation was gonna happen. But taking it back to the ERGs, and something that's been really incredible for me this past 2 years is I moved back to Florida through our mortgage line of business, and I get a phone call from the leader of the Latin Connections, which is our ERG. It says, we want you to be a part of our board. And I was like, what am I? I mean, okay, yes, of course, yes. I remember the lesbian lady. Yes. And it has been just amazing to be a lesbian on a Hispanic Latino ERG. And they are like, they're like, well, tell us what did Pride do? Well, tell us what Pride did, because it's just, they're leaning into learning from me, and more importantly, they're getting exposed to somebody that is uniquely different than them, but we have similarities, right, in the way that we're raised and where we come from and how we engage and interact in society. So, again, I'm happy, Michael, that you called me. I'm glad that I came, and more importantly, I'm learning so much from each of you, and just excited to share a little piece of my story.
Thank you for sharing your story. And that's the point. Share your stories. We learn from you. We didn't give you any tools here specifically. We gave you our experience so you could take that back and do something with it. I know the last slide was about health and family. We got a great story about family. Just some quick things that you should think about. We talked in the last session, I heard them talking about the anti-LGBT laws that were being passed, and there are firms that are offering benefits that will transport people to states where it's safe for them to get their gender-affirming care. Well, Roe v. Wade, same thing happened. Partner with your women's TM or enterprise resource groups, and think about benefits that you need and partner with your HR. We've got benefits that are coming in our company that are specifically geared towards the LGBTQ community and the Black African American community. So we're going to bring them together within the new offerings that we have from Included Health. There's so many ways that you can partner together. So with that, we have very few minutes left. I'm not going to drain the conclusion slide. Does anyone have any final questions before we open it to questions from the audience?
Send it out to the audience.
All right. Do we have any questions out there? Can you bring the lights up a little bit? Thank you.
Hey there, my name is Andrew, he, him pronouns. So we very clearly explored that with intersectionality we have a lot of power. But for someone who's at quite a few crossroads of intersectionality, do you find yourselves leaning towards, I guess, some of those intersectional voices whenever you're bringing up speakers or keynotes? So not just having someone that is LGBTQ for Pride Month, but finding that intersectionality of being LGBTQ and Latino, or LGBTQ and Asian, or LGBTQ Asian and Latino like myself.
I would say definitely. I don't want to grab the mic, but that's exactly what we were saying here today, is that we already have a point of view. We're preaching to you all. We're all here for the same diverse dimension, and we all have so many others to share. And isn't it so much more powerful when we look at those lived experiences that intersect?
I mean, so I help with some of our programming, and one thing we did for Pride Month was we had Vernice, Black Girl or More. She was a Black lesbian veteran, and it went really well. We covered many of the different groups, and hopefully reached out to a lot of them. So I think it does speak to that intersection and bringing all those voices together to talk about those lived experiences and walking through that.
You touch more people with the message. I see one over there.
Hi, so I'm one of the leads of education for the Pride ERG at my company, and one of the things that we're very intentional about is highlighting intersections, so that way we're able to celebrate that diversity and bring people into the group. Something we've been trying to do is partner with other ERGs to also help us and be there with us, sort of thing of like if the African American Descent Network is talking about Audre Lorde, then more people within their network then like see that and like, oh, me too, we can be here and be part of that as well. But what we end up finding with some of the groups, our Hispanic Latino network, we have a lot of pushback, and they're like, well, why? How is that part of our culture and things like that? I'm mixed race myself, Puerto Rican, so it's always hurtful when these sorts of things happen. But have y'all experienced situations where there is pushback, or how do you get past that pushback and sort of try and open that connection point in communities that tend to see that as other?
I can take it, yeah. So I don't think that's unique. And so I told you I used to own like the ERG ecosystem, and one of our calls to action to all the ERGs was like make the programming intersectional. When you identify a guest speaker, make sure they have multiple identities and experiences they can speak from. And we experienced that too. And as I kind of sat back and asked some questions and thought about it, I think one of the things that you kind of get close to the people that are experiencing it is that those narratives have never been centered before. And so the pushback oftentimes comes from, well, are you going to take control of that narrative? And for several, so I mentioned like our military, our Pride, our LGBTQ+, and our disability ERGs, which are the most intersectional groups that we have, a lot of that leadership is white. And so oftentimes that becomes that those groups are considered or perceived as white groups because there isn't people of color within those leadership roles. And so I think what I'm experiencing and what we're working through is how do we make sure that those narratives are continued to be centered, and that we're coming with that and not telling it. You know, people don't want to be told what to do. They'll do what you say, but you've got to bring them along and help them understand the value of it.
Good question, thank you.
I think we've got 20 seconds, but I'll make a quick comment. So I'm a banker by trade, so I always lead with the value I can give. So I'd say, if there's Hispanic Heritage Month, what's Pride doing to celebrate that? And ask for somebody to help you be part of the committee. So like, hey, we're doing this at Pride, and we want you guys to help us. Like, it's small steps, little wins. That's how you do it. You start showing the value that Pride has. So that's another thought.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm looking forward to seeing you tonight at Animal Kingdom, and I want to thank my panel. I would not feel comfortable without them here beside me. Love you all, and have a wonderful summit.